Olivia was graduated on Saturday last week, so we were there, Calvary Baptist Church in Winona on Sunday, and then got her moved out and moved home, and so just in time, she could play the piano today. So that's kind of nice. And then we're back this week. On the schedule was to finish our catechism section. And then the next 2 Sundays, right now I'm scheduled to be in Morris, filling in for Mike Atanas. So that's what the tentative schedule is now, and brings us back sometime like in the future. Memorial Day or something, I don't know. So that's our goal. But I did, as Pastor alluded to in the sermon, I don't know if anybody has questions or if there's something some gap I can fill in. Numbers 5 verses 1 through 4 is assuming that you know a lot of other passages. So it's very short. But is there? Yeah, how do you get leprosy in walls? Yep. Yeah, in Leviticus 13, there's different kinds of leprosy. There's many different kinds of leprosy. Some which are constituted as unclean and some which are not. Some are skin diseases. Some which are... So I can back up and maybe answer that question a little bit. In the Old Testament law, and we'll see this in later, actually, Numbers 5, where you actually have some legal code. So a lot of the legal code, the way it's written, you'll see if statements. And those if statements are really actually quite good. They're helpful. So if you ever want to try to kind of figure out what's going on, usually the law that they're talking about is stated first, and then it'll say if, it'll give a condition, and then it'll say if, and it'll be like a sub-condition, and you'll have a few ifs underneath there, and what happens. And then it'll go back out to a bigger if, to the bigger section. And then it'll go to a new section, and it'll say, and then about this other thing, and it goes on. And the test for adultery is a good example of that. So having said that, in Leviticus 13, when you get into the sections of the leprosy, the word leprosy is the generic topic of all of these subcategories. So we translate the word as leprosy in English, and that's an okay translation. Although now I'm old enough that I'm trying to remember what the word is, but in Hebrew. But there's basically, it almost came to me. We'll see if it does. So you have that. It's just kind of the general topic, leprosy, and then it'll say, now if it's this condition, you have if the skin looks like this. Here's one scenario. If the skin looks like this, here's a second scenario. If the skin looks like this, here's the third scenario. And here's what you do if those things are true. Now, in the case of leprosy, the priest is the one who has to come out and discern. So you have to send someone to go ask the priest to come out and look at it. And the same is true for your fabrics. The phrase, what is the phrase? For those of you who weave, what is it? Whiff and woof? No, woof and... Warp and woof. Warp and woof? Okay. The phrase warp and woof, you've heard that phrase, those of you who weave? The warp goes one way and the woof goes the other. Okay, that actually comes from Leviticus 13. So in case you ever wondered where that came from, that actually comes from the Bible. Yep. Right. So there's in general, the impurity laws are often thought of in some kind of health-related or communal way, like the food. You'll often hear it said that the reason pork was prohibited was because of the disease that the pork carried, so trichinosis and other things like that, and that's why it was forbidden. But actually, the Bible never says that. So no offense, Paul, if that's hurts. But the Bible actually never does that. So a lot of the things that you read on these impurity laws or the Old Testament food laws or anything like that, look at them from a cultural perspective or an anthropological perspective or a medical perspective that isn't what God says. So in all of these, there's a discernment that God is expecting. So, for example, Leviticus 11, and you're welcome to look at it if you like. I obviously don't have slides for these because I didn't, prepare this as a Sunday school lesson, but, well, maybe. Associated with corduroy? I don't know if corduroy is woven. It's possible. Because if you rub it one way, it makes noise, and if you rub it the other way, it doesn't. I don't know. I don't know. Well, no, I don't know that there's any leprosy in the nails. So that's a good question. That would be Leviticus 13. In the nails. It's all in the soft tissue. Yeah. So Leviticus 11. So at the very beginning of the chapter, it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, 'Speak to the people of Israel, saying.'" Okay, so that's kind of a standard formula. We saw that in Numbers 4. And then it says, "These are the living things that you may eat." Okay, so now he's going into the law, and that like the title of the law would be "Living Things That You Can Eat." Okay, and then he goes into the different categories. If you look at the end of the chapter, there's a concluding statement, and there's actually two concluding statements in Leviticus 11, which is a little unusual. But Leviticus 11:46. "This is the law about beast and bird and every living creature that moves through the waters and every creature that swarms on the ground." So he's summarizing what the law, all of chapter 11 was about. Verse 47, "To make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, between the living creature that may be eaten and the living creature that may not be eaten." So with all of these laws, there are distinctions that have to be made. And it's true for all of them. As you go through, there will be distinctions that have to be made. Verse 44, if we go up in Leviticus 11, "For I am the Lord your God. Concentrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming thing that crawls on the ground." No eating centipedes, basically, or ants, I suppose. There's rabbinical debate as to whether or not it includes crickets, because you can eat certain locusts, but crickets, yeah, I don't know. You're not tempted to eat crickets? Certain locusts you can eat and certain locusts you can't eat. "For I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, your God. You shall be holy. You shall therefore be holy as I am holy." So the laws are always brought back to God's holiness and the distinction between what is holy and what is not holy. Now, in some regard, as Pastor said, they seem to us as arbitrary. Well, why can I eat this animal, but I can't eat that animal? Why can't I eat pork? Now, by the way, Jesus clearly does away with the food laws. He explicitly does away with the food laws in the Gospels. And so does, he does in his earthly ministry, and then he does with Peter in Acts chapter 9, 10. He makes it very clear that the food laws have gone away. But, so feel free to eat pork and lobster or crickets if you want, or centipedes. No, I had Yes, John. Right. So when it comes to food laws, in particular, there's two things, and I'm trying to remember the passage in the Gospels where it's very clear. I think it's in Matthew or Mark. I'll see if it comes to me. Acts 15. Yep. And Acts 15 is slightly different, and so is Romans 14. But in Acts chapter 10, this one I remember. So Peter's waiting for dinner to be made, the noon meal, whatever you call that around here, the noon meal. And as he was probably getting in the way of the women in the kitchen, they sent him out. So he went up to the rooftop to pout. And while he's up there, he went up on the housetop. This Acts chapter 10, verse 9. Peter went up on the housetop about the 6th hour, which is about noon, to pray, and he became hungry, and he wanted something to eat. But while they were preparing it, he fell into a trance and saw the heavens open and something like a great sheet descending, being let down by its four corners upon the earth. In it were all kinds of animals and reptiles and birds of the air. And there came a voice to him, saying, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Now in your red letter edition, it's in red because it's Jesus who's talking to him. But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." So obviously there are items on this buffet that are considered unclean. And the voice came to him a second time, saying, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times, and this was taken up to heaven. Now it says that Peter was perplexed, but later he figures out that not only was all food clean, but it was also that the gospel was going to the Gentiles. And then there is a comment in the Gospels where it's either Matthew or Mark says, by which Jesus made all food clean. And he actually stated specifically in there that he did away with it. So, on the one hand, these food laws, and again, this I think because in the New Testament the food laws were done away with, that Jesus is saying, or the scriptures are teaching us, God is teaching us through the scriptures, that the food laws were particular to the people of Israel, not for some hygienic or medical or health reason. He was teaching them something else. Now, what was the something else? Right, that's the question as to why one or not the other. Do you want to chase Acts 15 first? Well, we have Acts 15 and blood sausage. Now, Acts 15, so let's go talk. So blood sausage is slightly different because of Genesis chapter 9. And Genesis chapter, if I can get back to Genesis chapter 9. Why is blood sausage different? Okay, so Genesis 9, this is after the flood. God is giving some instruction to Noah. Okay, and so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, and upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. As I gave you the green plants, I give you everything." Now, referring to the green plants, that refers to Genesis 1, verse 10. Sorry, Genesis 1:10. Okay, so in the beginning, in the garden, and after the garden, all creatures, including humankind, were vegetarians. Okay. Animals didn't become carnivorous until after the flood. Because the earth was perfect, everyone was vegetarian? Oh. Yeah. Yeah, because according to Revelation, the end of Revelation, there's no animals in the new heaven and the new earth, as far as we know. All right, so now the animals are also afraid of human beings. So before this, animals and humans get along. Before this, Tyrannosaurus Rex uses his sharp teeth to eat watermelons. He doesn't use them to eat, people. Okay, so there's, it makes you look at dinosaurs differently. But now there is a fear of animals, so animals run away from humans, and humans can eat them for food now, but they have to work hard. So before, humans ate food, or ate vegetables, fruits and vegetables, and after the part of the curse is, you have to work hard for your food. That's part of the curse. Now you can eat animals, but guess what? The animals are going to run away from you, and so you have to work hard for your food. Okay, so this is still the same thing. But you'll notice that in Genesis 9, which comes a long time before the nation of Israel is a nation, people of Israel become a nation, they were allowed to eat anything. Okay, all of the animals, all of the creeping things, all of the fish in the sea were eligible for food. There was one restriction. Verse 4, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood, and for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. Okay, so in other words, you could not eat a medium rare steak. Okay, you had to cook it, or a dinosaur flank, or whatever they were. You had to cook it well done. You could not eat the meat. So the blood sausage rule was in effect in Genesis 9. You couldn't eat the blood. Now, some have asked, well, has that law gone away? Because it's never mentioned again in the scriptures. But there is a change between Genesis 9 and Leviticus 11 in the food laws. And then there's a change in the food laws once again when Jesus comes. He changes them once again. And they'll be changed again in the millennial kingdom. We'll go back to being vegetarians. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there'll be pet. Yeah, there'll be pet cows. Yep. No mashed potatoes and gravy. Yeah, or biscuits and gravy. Biscuits and gravy. Oh, yeah. Yep. Okay, so that's the blood sausage. Did I answer your blood sausage question? Not really. So, yeah. So Acts 15, so this is Paul's question, you had some Jewish believers and you had some Gentile believers, and there was strife between the two, and you also run into this in Romans 14 a little bit. You have some strife between the two, and the question, let's see where we can find the question. So the original question, or the question for the reason they're meeting, has to do with circumcision. Do you need to be circumcised in order to be saved? And the conclusion to that is no. Okay, but they have a council to talk about this, this difference, and they say, let's see. is it 29? Is that right? So in verse 19, I'm going to come back to verse 19. They say, therefore my judgment, who's talking? Paul? Paul is talking. Paul says, therefore my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God. Okay, so we don't want to put unnecessary restrictions on Gentile believers. Verse 20, but we should write to them, to the Gentile believers, to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and from that which has been strangled, and from blood. So it's the last two that's in controversy, right? Because no one has an issue with abstaining from idols or sexual immorality, whether you're Jew or Gentile. Okay, but what about the strangled and from the blood? So, verse 21, from the ancient generations Moses has had in every city those who proclaim him, for he is read every Sabbath in the synagogue. So the Jewish believers are, this is very difficult for them to understand this change. The scriptures at this time still are the Old Testament. So this is what they're reading, and they're asking the same question that you are. Well, can we eat blood sausage? Because Moses says, Moses does in Genesis 9, says that we can't. So why can we now? Why can the Gentile Christians eat blood sausage? Why can they bring it to the potlucks? But the Jewish people, that's offensive to them. So what do we do? Now, when it says strangled, all animals that were to be, or all animals that you could strangle, the blood had to be let out. You couldn't kill an animal by strangling it and then cook it and eat it. Okay, you had to let the blood out before you could cook it. And this is might be in Leviticus 11 also. But you have to cook it properly. I know there's some other passages that talks about where you can sacrifice and where you can't. But you always have to let the blood out, even if it's a bird. And from blood. Okay, so what has been strangled and from blood. So they're asking the Gentile believers that when you get together with your Jewish friends for a potluck, don't do that. It's a stumbling block to those Jews. Verse 21. Okay, so when we get to verse 29 then, this is the letter that they write to the churches. They request that they abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, and what has been strangled, and sexual immorality. So the same four things. And then, as you recall, probably, I think, was it Romans 14? No, it's 1 Corinthians, sorry, not Romans 14. In 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10, if you remember pastors preaching through that, Paul, in very legal fashion, like a Jewish lawyer, which he was, goes through the case law of eating food offered to idols. Because the Gentiles were asking the question, well, we're free to eat anything, aren't we? And Paul's, so we can eat meat offered to idols. And Paul says, well, you can eat meat offered to idols, but let's talk about it. You can't go to the temple and offer sacrifices to idols. That's clearly a sin. Okay? You can't go to the temple and eat food that other people have offered to idols because you're participating in the worship of demons. Okay, so you can't do that. You can't go to the market and buy meat that you know has been offered to idols because you're still participating in idol worship. If you go to your friend's house and they offer you a cheeseburger and say, oh, I picked up this meat at the market today that was offered to idols, you can't eat it. So you can only eat it if someone offers you a cheeseburger and never tells you where the meat came from, and you don't ask. So the only time you can eat meat offered to idols is when you don't know that you're eating meat offered to idols. Okay, in other words, you can't. All right, his answer at the end of the day was you can't do that ever. No roadkill pheasants. Unless it bled out, maybe. We can get into some rabbinic discussion on that, I guess. How do you bleed out a pheasant? Oh, you cut its head off. Hang it. Yeah, like a chicken. Yep. Yeah, eat beef is a lot easier. The priests have rules for, like in Leviticus 15. You know, one of the sin offerings is a pigeon or a dove, and they don't cut the head off. They wring the head off, and they let the blood out of the bird. Yeah, or let them run around the yard. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'll see if Laura will cut the hair.
Oh, here we go. Mark 7:19. Mark 7:19 is the verse.
Sort of an editorial remark,
It
though.
is.
It feels like it's supposed to
Well,
be
but,
events for that.
yeah, and well, it would. I mean, Mark, obviously, Peter, and Peter, is probably dictating to Mark here what to say, but what defiles a person? So Mark 7, Jesus calls the people to him again, and he says to them, so this is Jesus speaking, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him." And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart but his stomach and is expelled?" And then the parenthetical reference that Mark makes is, "Thus he declared all foods clean." And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. So concluding the food discussion, this is the passage I was looking for before, where Peter and Mark are saying all foods have been made clean. So all the Old Testament food laws have gone away. And yes, this would have been after, at least after Acts chapter 10, certainly. May or may not have been after, depends on how you date Acts 15, but certainly after Acts chapter 10.
Clarifying. So that they are alright. Is there any seven I'd like that. Doesn't use formula. But clarify. Opposite. Because having grown up himself in the midst of the dietary system, that's not really.
Right. So in this case, I think it goes back to Mark. This passage is actually a fairly good one to land on here, because he's using the word defile. So in Leviticus 11, 12, 13, 14, in Numbers 4, which I think is referring to those things that required the sin offering, which Pastor mentioned in passing, particularly, these are things that defile a person, not because they made an act of sin, but they found themselves in the state of whatever situation they were in, whether it was the leprosy, for lack of a better term, the leprous state. They didn't do anything to incur that; it just happened. Whether it was unnatural emission, Leviticus 15 and 12, man or woman, they found themselves in that position. They didn't necessarily do something to incur that. And being around dead bodies, and I actually take Numbers 5 as referring to dead bodies in particular, not necessarily dead animals, but that becomes something that you end up having to do as a human, is people around you die and you have to deal with the dead body. So you find yourself in that situation. And again, you're not transgressing a law, but you find yourself there, and you have to know when you have become defiled or when you haven't. When you talk to Jews, even Jews today who are quote-unquote devout, one of the things that they get stuck on is the outward ritual of the Old Testament. So like with the food laws, they're very particular about the food laws. And you've heard me have you ever heard that Jews have two sets of dishes, right? One is for meat, one is for milk. Okay, because they don't eat cheeseburgers. Okay, you can't have dairy with meat together. So they take that all the way to the point of their dishes. They have two cupboards. One is a dairy cupboard and one is a meat cupboard. And you have to learn, and silverware, same thing. You have to learn, so what are we eating today? Okay, so then you know which dishes to get out. Otherwise, you're in trouble. They were afraid of that outward defilement, that I might eat something that I shouldn't eat, or eat it in the wrong way, and and now I'm defiled. So this is where some of those rabbinic traditions come in. Well, what is the definition of well done? Hamburger, What is a kosher hot dog? What is, and you have kosher, which, if you've heard of kosher, that's all of the dietary laws. So if you pick up a jar of pickles and it's got the kaf, the Hebrew letter kaf on the side, which stands for kosher, then, if you're a Jewish person, you can eat those pickles. So anyway, what Jesus is saying here is sin is not merely